So,
Yeah, right.
so anyways, though, Philip, how's it going today?
It's going well.
Thanks
How are
for
you?
sitting. I'm doing well, man. About to be doing better. Loading up a bowl of greens, you know?
A
So,
bowl.
hell
I
yeah,
didn't
dude.
take you for a bowl guy.
You know, I am definitely more of a joint, guy, and you
Yeah.
can definitely tell that if you've watched the video version of this podcast. Speaking of which, for folks that don't know, chillinois.net/video, and you can watch us right now. So, good morning, dude. You ready to do a little bit of a wake and bake and chat about what the fuck's going on?
Definitely.
Cool. Well, for folks that are wondering who the hell you are, I wanted to just say that we have been connecting or kind of, communicating online for quite some time. And let me just tell you how I became aware of you. I like to post news different places. Like I'm constantly Googling Illinois cannabis news. Like I'll Google that like every day. And
I know that.
yeah. And like,
I'll Google it multiple times a day even.
yeah. See, you know what it's about. And so much probably that which articles are stale and which articles are fresh. You're like, oh, that's a new one, right?
Oh yeah.
And when I would post articles sometimes they would literally just drop, like I'd get an email about an article and be like, oh yeah, no question. I don't even have to read this article to know that I need to share this article. And so I would start to share it. And like, so for example, on Reddit, it would be like, this article's already been shared. And I was like, what? This article literally just came out 5 minutes ago. Who the fuck else is like on it like that? And it was you. So.
Someone who was unemployed for 18 months during the pandemic.
Cheers to that.
Yeah. I mean, I just find it, like cannabis and like the time we're in Illinois and everything. I mean, nationally, it's fascinating. I think people know it's remarkable that weed is, now legal. It's always in quotes when we'll say it, that.
Yep.
But yeah, I just find it super fascinating. And I think it's like when you follow cannabis news and you follow it closely, I feel like it's kind of like insightful on other issues and kind of like the way government works,
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't mean to say I've always said, I've been saying that I think that cannabis is a gateway drug to politics. If you start, and by that, I mean, if you pay attention to the way that cannabis legalization goes, you might become frustrated and then you might realize that that's the way that almost everything else in our life
works. It's funny because it was kind of the opposite for me when I think about it, because I always loved politics since I was a kid. And then like the 2020 election was just so mind-numbingly dumb. Yeah. Like I just needed, it was nice that cannabis legalization came around at that time, because that was like a nice change and like a hyper local story to follow,
Yeah.
A nice distraction from that race.
Absolutely. Well said. Yeah. It did come at a good time, both when we needed it and when we needed it mentally, like,
yeah,
we not only needed it physically, but mentally. Yeah. That's a good point. Well, yeah, another reason that I wanted to bring you on is not only that it seems like you digest the news as much as I do, but you just did it there. You were like legal, everything I notice you mentioned and you focus on. It's like, yes, somebody else is taking it home, So.
Well, it's funny. You'll comment on something I'll say sometimes, like, I feel like you're the only one that gets this sometimes. And I'm definitely not, like it's, I don't know. I feel like people just, like legalization happens and then like people just kind of get complacent.
Yeah.
They accept it for what it is. And I don't know, I don't see enough news stories about like, like you had that one from, was it the Tribune of the Sun Times that was talking about racial disparities in arrests post legalization?
Yeah.
Why don't we see more stories like that?
Right.
I think mostly it's because people don't care, but.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know what truth there is to this, but Vintage Buds, somebody who's pretty active on Illinois trees, has said that he's not able to find some of that data that we're talking about. Like the state hasn't published it. So again, I don't know how true any of that is. I needed to do some more research myself. But to your point, I wonder. That's something I got to look into for sure. Because you make a great point. Like nobody is reporting on it. I wonder though, with like I say, when I bring vintage's perspective, I wonder if that's why. Like if the data is just not available, you know. And if so, that's a travesty.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're definitely interested in selling legalization as like a successful thing, you know.
True.
Like the governor runs around calling it the most socially equitable cannabis market in the country.
Yeah, and
like a lie. Like you can't call it anything other than a lie.
Right. And I guess to kind of push back on my own point, I'm sitting here talking about like I'm almost kind of giving them room on saying, well, maybe that data is not there, but it's like they're so apt to grab for other data. To your point, like they'll publish all this, like, oh, it's the most social.
31% of licenses went to black-owned black applicants. You know,
right?
Yeah, but when they have the numbers they want to talk about, of course they have the numbers.
Yeah, yeah, very, very well said. Yeah, and like you said, I don't know how to really. It's a point I've been wrestling with for a while, but you just put it pretty succinctly. People seem to get complacent after legalization. So like, you know, I've seen a lot of people pointing out lately different brands that are white labeling cannabis, you know, making a new brand and white labeling it. And then people getting frustrated about it. And it's like, well, this is like nothing new. And in fact, I think one of the number one reasons people become complacent, because when you go to the store, there are 90 brands, but they all go back to the same 18 companies. So to the consumer who doesn't do their research like you and I, they're like, well, there are plenty of companies and plenty of brands. It's like,
well, yeah. I don't know what I was just going to say about that.
No worries. I don't know. It's just, I like, so I guess I bring that up because I do say that to you sometimes. Like, I feel like nobody else gets it. And I guess what I mean by that is like, it just seems like everybody that I'm trying to give the person that comes into the store that doesn't dig into everything like you and I, the benefit of the doubt. Like it would be hard if you're looking at a wall of products to discern what is actually going on. And that of course is the farce, the smoke and mirrors game that they're playing, you know?
Well, yeah. And when you have, you know, like a brand, like it was Vic Mensa's brand, like they kind of were advertising that almost like it was a new licensee,
right?
Like it, you know, it's like, oh, this black owned brand, but it's just a brand that's licensed to Arise. It's not anything new.
Right.
It's the same stuff they grow.
Yeah. Well, and frankly, I gotta be, you know, people get weird when two white dudes get together and comment anything about race. But I will say that like, I think Mike Tyson was selling weed in the state of Illinois before that under a brand. And so, I mean, that was a black owned brand. You know, but again, last time I even put like half of a cent onto that topic, people were outraged. So I'm going to tiptoe away from that one. But people are very defensive of their cannabis cultivators and brands. So
well, people love brands, you know, like people like adopt brands as their identity in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So then they get weird and defensive when you call into question, you know, what the owners of those brands do, you know, and how they advocate against like them, like the person who's adopting their brand as their identity. Like you're stuck, like you have like Stockholm syndrome almost. Like you've been stuck with these owners and these brands. You've learned to love it. That's your identity now. So now when someone calls it into question, it's like a personal attack or something, you know, but it's like, you shouldn't even be stuck with those brands. Like you should be able to have any number of choices like, and like smaller time brands, you know, people you could actually interact with or contact or talk to somewhere.
Right. Yeah. And I guess to really like kind of shifted away from Illinois, if that got a little too personal for some people, like to your point of Stockholm syndrome, like it's weird to see like Wiz Khalifa, a rapper, and other big time celebrities going to Florida, a medical market, to celebrate the launch of a dispensary. Like when I see people who are opponents of cannabis legalization, in other words, they're not for it, and they like point to events like that, I'm like, because they're basically like, hey, like the Circle K thing
because
too.
it's supposed to be like medical.
Right. And it's like,
I mean, I mean, the distinction between medical and recreational is it's like a Costco card. It's like, if you're going to buy a lot, you get the medical card. Like that's really like, it's only because prices would be high. It's like shopping over in Michigan these days. I rarely ever use my medical card because there's just more options on the rec site and prices are so cheap and the tax differential is like 10%.
Yeah.
So they just incentivize everyone to kind of shop in the same market.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I fundamentally agree with that. Like basically, the medical card is, I mean, look.
Well, in Illinois though, it's also other states, it's more legal protections too,
Yes. Very well said. Very well said. So yeah, in Illinois, you can afford yourself the right to grow or whatever else. But at the end of the day, like you say, I think what you're really saying and what we both agree on is that like, you don't need a justification to use cannabis, and that's all the medical card is. No. We just created it as a concept,
I don't remember which ones, but there's places where you can just self-attest.
Mm-hmm. Washington, D.C. now. In fact, Washington, D.C., they allow that for residents and non-residents now. So even if you don't live there, you can self-attest and then go to a Washington dispensary. No. And so, the folks at SAM are crying foul and saying, look, they're just making a joke of their medical cannabis system. And it's like, you're making a joke of their political system, because I don't mean to say SAM is specifically, but like the people of Washington, D.C., from what I understand, have tried to make adult use cannabis legal, but there's something called the Harris Rider. And I think it has something to do with
the actual Congress has to
bingo
do it. So they're not going to do that.
And they're not going to do it. And so they're kind of making a joke of the medical cannabis program.
But you self-attest to a medical need for all kinds of medicine when you walk into a CVS and you buy any number of things off the shelves,
Very well said. And that's the sort of thing that people,
Yeah, a lot of the thinking, like a lot of the discussion we have with weed, it's just all still based with like stigma attached to it, because it's weed. It's scary.
Yeah, exactly. The way that it's sold, I mean, everything. It can't be sold in the store with anything else. You can only buy a limited amount. You can only have a limited amount. Yeah, we're treating it like it's like a bomb.
Well, even
or
just
something.
The whole licensing process, like I was looking it up because I was curious, like what you have to do to start like roasting coffee, like to start a coffee roastery and like get a stand at a farmer's market. I'm pretty sure you don't need like much. Like it doesn't require getting licensed.
Yeah.
I think if you're probably at a certain scale, you probably have some kind of like food safety requirements.
Sure.
Maybe an inspection, but like, yeah, it's not like there's a limited number of coffee roasting licenses, and it's just, they make it so complicated just because, it's weed. So it's, I guess, scary. So you got to like go through this whole rigmarole to like be able to sell it to people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I know that we are bouncing around, but the licensing is just, it's insane. And like, I think the craziest thing about the entire licensing structure is back to the point you originally brought up. It is supposed to be about social equity, yet it costs like $5,000 per application you file, $40,000 a year, I think, for the craft cultivation. And then you've got so many other legal fees. And it's like, if this is for somebody who is disadvantaged, who is disproportionately affected by the war on drugs, do you expect them to be that capitalized to even compete?
Well, I don't know why there wasn't, or why there still isn't, like Michigan's caregiver system.
Yeah.
why wouldn't they set something like that up for social equity? I mean,
Well,
it's small time, but
yeah,
like you can do that out of your basement
yeah.
or like a garage.
I really think that they're just afraid that's going to cut into their bottom line. Like
Well,
they've
yes.
determined, they've
There's
determined,
definitely reasons that doesn't exist here.
yeah, they've
Yeah.
just determined that anything like home grow, anything like a caregiver system, anything that would seem easier on licensing, that is cutting into their bottom line, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see how that caregiver thing goes. I don't know if you saw the interview that Gronin did with the new head regulator at the Michigan.
I read it quickly, but it was something about enforcement and black market.
Yeah, definitely check out the whole interview for folks that are listening too. It's definitely worth a read. Basically, they appointed the head of the Cannabis Regulatory Authority in Michigan now is an I believe he's a former cop, former service member, which, whatever. I'm just bringing those things up.
Well,
He,
that's who you hire if you want more enforcement, I guess, right?
yeah, and they kind of asked him about enforcement, and he pretty well indicated that they're going to try to clamp down on what they determined to be, black market cannabis. And they asked about the caregiver system, and he would not go there. He really wouldn't comment. So, all I'm saying is, it seems like they got some thoughts brewing, and it'll be interesting.
Depending on how their gubernatorial election goes, if like a Republican were to lead the state, you could see, depending who's leading, you could see more or less of a crackdown.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Well said. So it'll be definitely interesting how that plays out. But I don't know, like it seems like the driving force behind all of these things, and you've said it before, I've tried to say it, I've always had trouble saying this, but it just seems like the driving force between all of these things is to artificially inflate the value of cannabis.
And the licenses.
Yes, and the licenses. That is key. Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
I don't even know if it's worth really talking about licenses too much anymore. Like, the thing I would love to see, which I know you agree with, is just home grow for everyone, ending possession limits. Like, do you know, I think she's a state rep. She might be a state senator, but Mary Flowers.
No, I don't, but I love her name.
She was the one who had, yeah, well, it's fitting. She was the one that had that bill proposed that was like to get rid of possession limits. And I actually looked it up recently, and it actually it allowed possession and delivery of any amount.
Wow.
You should have her on the show.
Yeah. I'll have to reach out to her. I
think she represents an area like just over, like also on the southwest of Chicago. Like I think suburbs, maybe like Bridgeview, something like that area.
I reached out to Representative Carol Ammons from Champaign because
she was the one with the home grow.
Yeah, and I liked it because she used the language. She copy and pasted language from the medical cannabis home grow to adult use, which would mean that at home, nobody would have a possession limit anymore at home, which is a win, in my opinion, That
is good, but I do think you need to get some kind of ability to gift your home grow. It's just not worth prosecuting people over that kind of thing.
Yeah.
The state does it still all the time. When we were standing outside of dispensaries for that weekend, protesting them, I would talk to people, and, in the city dispensaries, they were pretty excited to talk to people who would be holding signs advocating for home grow outside of dispensary. But you'd talk to them and people would be kind of shocked that you can still get a mandatory minimum for having, it's a lot of weed, but you can still get a minimum of 6 years for having a certain amount of weed.
Right. Yeah.
I think people just don't think about it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the possession limits are crazy. People look them up. I mean, literally, if you exceed an ounce, maybe not on your first offense, but on your subsequent offense, you're definitely facing fines and potential felonies. It's
Mm-hmm.
crazy. So,
Well, yeah. And for visitors, it's even half that amount,
yeah,
which is
abs-
like back to how it was before. Like, I think wasn't like up to 14 grams decriminalized,
I think it was
or was it more than that?
10. I think it was 10.
10? What an odd
Yeah.
amount.
Yeah, it was an odd amount. It was more, but I think Bruce Rauner pushed back. He vetoed it and said basically, if you bring it back with a smaller amount, there's a chance I'll sign it. And I think he said there's a chance I'll sign it, but basically he had to sign it because of just the way that politics was working at that time.
Sorry, this guy is like
Oh no,
just crawling over here.
he looks like our kitty.
Yeah, I know you said that before.
Yeah.
Go away, buddy.
Claude's cute. Well, anyways,
Claude is very cute.
All cats are welcome on the Chillinois podcast.
Well, if he smells weed, he just comes a rolling around. He loves to bury his face in a jar of it. He just sits there and like you just see his little nose. Like it's funny.
Who'd he learn that from?
I wonder. Yeah.
Yeah, but back to your point, I think like you say, I'm personally, if asked, I will give my opinion on licensing. But frankly, my target is home grow and ending possession limits at this point, because if you think about it, that's kind of what we've been saying this whole time. Like you even started by saying it's legal. And what you meant by that is like, you just assume that when cannabis is legal, that you can fucking grow it and have as much as you want, just like any fucking thing else in our life,
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's what we have to work on fixing first and foremost.
Well, and it's like, the license, like there's so much money and people's, like people are already down the road of this limited licensing framework. Like, I don't know if you can really reverse that car. Like, I think they're going to have to get out competed by neighboring states or, something will have to make them change it that is like that. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's going to be like people advocating for open licensing. Yeah. Because they clearly just don't care. Like, they don't care about consumers. They don't care about medical patients. They don't care about consumers. I don't know what other assumption to draw from the fact that there's only been 55 medical dispensaries forever.
Right.
You like downstate, like how inaccessible medical cannabis would be to someone who lives like maybe in the middle of two of them. Like, I don't know, they probably have to drive like an hour to get to one.
Yeah, they are few and far between down there.
Well, that's another, like tying the licenses to, because it's like population based, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it's based on the police precincts, but it's population based.
I think I'm actually not sure on that, but I'm not sure.
But there's far less licenses like downstate and like, on the borders.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I just think is like such a big fuck you to downstate. Cause like, think about how many people drive. Like if our weed was as cheap as Michigan and we had a free market, think about how booming like downstate towns would be, like little border towns. Like I can't even think of any, like Decatur, maybe. I don't know if they allow stores, but they'd have much more incentive to.
Yeah, I think they have one store. They've got a Sunnyside.
Right. Or like, yeah, what are the ones that are like way down south that people come from like Tennessee for? Like you would have like 40 shops down there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. A bunch in Carbondale. But
instead you just have you have less people coming, paying more for their product, and it's just going to like one or two people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that's what's crazy. That's what's crazy is that we're pulling in like big bucks, but we're
not that big.
Yeah. Not as big as it would be. You're right.
It would be so much bigger. Yeah. It would be like you wouldn't be making as much money on the things you're selling, but you'd be like selling more, it'd be getting way more business, and it'd be divided among so many more people. Yeah. Like, I don't know how to not call that like more equitable, but.
Yeah. And that's just, back to a point, like it's interesting that you've not seen anybody that that has been like awarded a conditional license or an actual license come out and say, all right, now that we have this thing, this can't continue. I don't want any other person to go through what I went through. This has got to change. You know, you've not seen anybody.
I don't know though. I would hate to like, as much as I would like love to litmus test people like that, you know, it's like, how do you really put that on someone who's gone through that whole process just to try to start a business?
Sure. That's a good point.
You know?
Yeah. I don't know. After all of the, you know, rigmarole, the court cases, the lawsuits, like it would seem that you would have somebody come out and say like the issue besides advocates, it seems like the only people that are bitching about the licensing system, I mean, I don't want to say the licensing system. Like you say, it just seems like I don't know of a clear voice that I can point to that is like an industry side, not on the advocate side.
Yeah. No, I couldn't think of one either.
You know?
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But maybe that's why we have a closed market.
Yeah, that's just it. Like, I just think that they also see the value in having a limited licensed market.
Yeah, well, and I think it goes back to like, if you take Illinois and Michigan, like where they wound up so different, when they started their medical market, Illinois' model was only like medicine as consumer good.
Yeah.
You know, Michigan's was cannabis as medicine. So I think like, you know, Illinois just started from such a weird place, you know, and it's still just like the business. Like there is no, I don't know what to call that. Yeah. There's like no like care in it. Like, again, like I talked to people outside dispensaries who were talking about how they can't get stuff they used to get, you know, like medicines they used to get. And it's like, well, yeah, because all these companies, you know, like there might have been a smaller company that was specializing in a more medical thing back in the day, but why would they do that now? They've either been bought out or there's just less incentive to do that.
Right. Yeah, very well said. And yeah, that's a great point you bring up that Illinois cannabis really started as like a consumer packaged goods market.
Well, I read that somewhere recently. I can't remember what I read that in, but I was that's like so. That's like
you're
a
on
great
the
way
money.
to think about it. You know,
you're on the money because I've attended meetings I maybe shouldn't have because. Well, I won't go into that because I don't know if I'm past the statute of limitations on that. But let's just say that companies will openly and proudly say to all of their employees in private circles, like, yeah, we are CPG, you know, Coca-Cola, all of these brands that sell consumer packaged goods. That's what we are. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I fundamentally disagree that cannabis is CPG. Like think about when you go and buy any other produce. A lot of it is
though. Like I think like things like cannabis beverages and edibles and vapes, like those are all obviously consumer packaged goods. But the fact that in Illinois, like you can only buy pre-packed weed that you can't actually smell. I mean, that's like so contrary to how you should be buying weed. Yeah. I mean, there's like buying weed over in Michigan, there's certain operators I would trust to buy a prepackaged eighth or a prepackaged ounce. But a lot of the time you know, I would search out specifically a smaller store that will have a deli style service because like I feel like smelling it is just so essential to deciding if you want to buy it, you know, and also when you're looking at like a price, it's like, damn, that's really cheap. Like, you can take the chance and spend, you know, it's less of a gamble over there, but you'd still much rather be able to smell stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know if God, can you imagine them ever getting to that? They'd have to like.
So they did it in the past. They did allow.
They did in Illinois allow it in the past?
Yeah, it was weird though. So I only know this because Justine used to work at a dispensary. You'd have a little jar that the cultivator would send. And it was a jar that allowed you could smell the jar, and you could smell.
Even that would be fine.
Yeah. Now the only issue with that was that the sample was basically stale in 2 weeks, so they have to figure that out, I guess. But, but yeah, it's but to your point, like, I didn't think about it that way. There are actually many products in the legal cannabis market that are CPG. That's actually a really brilliant point to bring up. But like you say, with flower, that is more like going and buying produce. And so, for example, sometimes I like to use this example because sometimes I go and I'm like, I want some fucking grapes. And I go and I look at the grapes and I feel the grapes. And, everybody always, you look around and you try one. Sometimes they're not good. And I decide to not buy grapes that day.
Yeah. No, and I think too, like flower will always be like a large part of the market. I don't know if it'll like diminish to some terribly small amount. And I think it does favor like a smaller, like a the analogy between like a craft brewery. Like we have 2 craft breweries down the street from us here, and neither of them distribute beer. They only brew it and serve it on site.
Yeah.
And I mean, that micro business model over in Michigan is kind of like, a version of that. It's like 150 plants. You have it in the same shop that you're selling. It's all like on the same site. Mm-hmm. And I just think like, if you can really like be good and deliver the quality on that, like there's no reason that will compete with the Cresco growing just tons and tons of product for cheap.
Yeah.
I think because that's one of the things about like, in like correlation to what I do in pet care, there was like large internet companies like WAG that would do like dog walking. But the industry of pet care, it's like, so you want to deliver a level of care and you can only really get so big until you kind of like start randomly killing people's pets and losing people's dogs and stuff like that. And I feel like that's how I feel about weed is it's like a similar thing, it favors smallness, like it leans towards smallness and anti-bigness. So like, you just have to like, let people do it at that scale.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very interesting analogy that makes perfect sense. So I like that.
It's just something that I think about just from my own experience, like, and just thinking about like competition. Cause I remember when those companies came out, it was like, fuck, like we got to compete with like the Uber of this industry now. But then they started randomly getting people's animals killed and stuff like that. So, and even like in the city, you'll have like a larger business. There was a story a year or two ago about some company left someone's dog in a van that got overheated in summer and like died in there. It's like if you have a big enough facility that things like that are happening, like maybe you've gotten too large.
Very good point. Very good point.
But I think about that a lot.
Yeah. That's interesting. I'm just, dwelling on that for a moment. And I mean, I don't know, just to swing it back to licensing for a brief moment. This will be the last one, I promise. But I really found it striking that in Oregon, when I interviewed, for folks that haven't seen it, I interviewed the executive.
I love that
guy. The controller. He's so fucking awesome. Very just really quick. Well, hold on. Let me tell the people about the episode. So he's the head regulator of Oregon Cannabis and Liquor Control. And Philip, didn't you appreciate the fact that I could ask him a question and he'd say, well, this is my personal opinion on the matter. Yeah. And he would give me his personal opinion. Like, I don't know. I'm just saying.
Are you saying that in relation to like when you interview regulators here or other regulators?
Maybe. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like, it's like no one is really interested in like having a contrarian opinion, it's like, cause you want to sell it as a success,
True.
So it's like, if they're giving their opinion, like they probably all agree it could have been done a lot better.
Fair. But yeah, the point I was going to bring up is that I thought it was interesting that it wasn't customers that were like, man, the weed sucks in Oregon. It wasn't like health issues. It wasn't like people are dying because of the weed in Oregon. It was the operators that were like, I cannot make money selling weed in Oregon. And so you need to cap licenses now. And so like, yes, they were open and wild, but they have that I found out at the end of that interview, they have instituted a moratorium so that it's not going to get any cheaper, basically, you know?
Yeah. The price of weed is interesting. Like it's interesting when you think about it. Like, what do you think is the future of the price of weed?
If I had it my way, it would be
like
so
if you had
cheap.
to guess. Yeah. Like that's what I think is the actual future of weed. Like I heard a guy, there was like this Canadian grower talking about how up in Canada, he's been able using like sun grown. I don't know the exact what he does, but he's producing it for like 70 cents a gram.
Yeah.
So that's like, he's producing it for like just over $300 a pound. So when like over in Michigan, you know, I think they're down to like 1,000 a pound, maybe less. You know, you just have to get your cost of production down really low if you want to make money. But that's why I think too, like Illinois might be screwing itself, is because people here don't have the incentive to do that as much, you know, like businesses can survive having, you know, producing at much higher cost because they can sell it so much higher. But then like when we eventually do have interstate commerce, like they're going to be fucked.
Right.
So like if you're trying to set up having grows here long term, like you should make them compete like cutthroat, like now.
Right. Exactly. If we're putting pads on the walls, we're making our state's applicants and industry participants weak. Let them compete, you know. That's what makes strong operators.
I think that I heard like Tom Howard say that was where I first heard that. I was like, yeah, that's like, and then you think like eventually you'll have international cannabis coming here.
Yeah.
It's like, are Illinois growers going to be able to compete with weed from Mexico?
Right.
Like, I doubt it.
Yeah. That's a brilliant point. Yeah. Credit to Tom Howard on that one. You just kind of brought that thought up for me, or, you know, and that's fucking awesome. I've never really heard it put that way before. So I'm totally with that. Hell yeah.
Totally.
Wait. Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know. You know, I remember when it was joked, like, will Illinois fuck up weed legalization? And we found a way, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's funny though, too, because I was thinking about like, you know, just being able like go doing this podcast. You know, I probably wouldn't have done this before 2020.
Sure.
Like I remember right after 2020 posting a picture just to my Instagram account, just in the story being like, hey, it's 2020, like this is legal now. And it was just a big pile of my weed on my counter just for my family and everyone to see.
Yeah.
But that was, I mean, I feel like it was only post 2020 when like, yeah, I did start going and smoking a joint on the patio before dinner at Thanksgiving. And I don't know. So there is like, I do feel like there was a relaxation of some of the stigma. And, you know, I feel emboldened to just smoke weed wherever I want, even though it's not legal to do that. You know, it's like, yeah, like people should smell it when they walk around. Get used to it.
Yeah.
And I don't have to worry about being hassled too much. I actually would love to kind of, I wouldn't love to, but it would be fun to get, because it won't be illegal forever, public, like smoking in public. It would be fun to get one of those tickets, like frame it and put it on the wall.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be fucking cool. That would be cool. And that's a brilliant point, dude, because it ultimately was the final push for me to start this project.
Well, right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like I wanted to do a podcast and I wanted to talk about something. Here's something. you know?
Yeah, totally.
And it's something that was part of my life anyways. So it was like, and like you said, otherwise I wouldn't have felt as emboldened to talk about it so openly.
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
And look at you. You've talked to Tommy Chong now.
Yeah, it's crazy, dude. It's
So
honestly
funny.
crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But
it's funny. It's like one of those cases. Like my mom used to love the movie Field of Dreams when I was a kid.
mm-hmm.
Uh, and it is one of those things that's like, hey, if you build it, they will come. You just got to like give people, like put yourself out there, and you approach people genuinely, like people will meet you where you're at and like engage with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the biggest lesson I'd say I'd learn out of all this. And I don't say it enough, like for people that are listening, like there's really nothing special about myself. I just bought this microphone off of Amazon and plugged it into my computer and used Zoom
I'm just
and
a dude
started
from
talking
Reddit.
to people. Yeah. Like we're just, it's really easy to do this. So if you're thinking about doing it, do it. You could talk to people like Tommy Chong and stuff like that. It's
Well, and also people should talk about like their cannabis use openly with people they know, Like I think
yeah.
that's a big, like Illinois still has a lot more stigma. Like again, to talk about the two states, Illinois, we spend a lot of time in Michigan because we have family there, but it feels less stigmatized over there to me. I mean, maybe that's just the family members that I interact with who like randomly will give us homegrown weed from friends of theirs and things, or the liberal home grow laws. But it's just culturally, Illinois feels like cannabis conservative. And I feel like people should just like smoke in public more, talk about smoking weed more with your friends and family and coworkers.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. I still even honestly, I need to, because I've talked to people about this before. I've had some people on my show that I've asked. I'm not going to make it specific, but you can probably just go back and make some assumptions, fill in the gaps where I've asked them, do you smoke cannabis? They're in the space and they even still will not answer the question.
Oh yeah. Well,
so
I feel like depending how old you are, that's like such a ingrained thing,
yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess what I'm saying is I have asked people after we got off air, why didn't you feel like you could mention that? I figure you do. And they'll be like, yeah, I do. And, they, like you say, it's just ingrained in them. And frankly, I always have to tell them because this is something that multiple people do. I do it myself. Like, frankly, sometimes I don't bring it up and I need to because I don't do it. The reason I don't do it is because I'm like, I don't want to get into an argument today, or I don't want to do it. No, you need to have that argument today. Like, it's almost like we need to start having those conversations. I don't mean to say an argument, but.
Well, and people should approach weed from the point of view of like, you have a right to smoke weed.
Mm-hmm.
You have, I consider, recreational is just such a funny way to term cannabis use. It's like, if you're using it, you're just using it and you have a right to use it for whatever reason. And don't let people make you feel bad about it.
Absolutely.
Don't feel judged for your use of it. If you get real high before you walk into a restaurant and people are glaring at you, fuck them.
Right.
Right. Also, because people act like cannabis is the only offensive odor on people in public.
Yes.
Yes. Come on.
Absolutely. That's hilarious. Yeah. Like, I mean, people just smoke cigarettes everywhere,
or like just super offensive colognes or perfumes.
True.
Like, ooh.
Yeah, true. Very true. Yeah. I think you're right that Illinois, there's still a lot of stigma alive in Illinois. I will say that there have been moments because I have been trying to just wear it on my chest now. And I've said it to people and it's not that big of a deal. And it's like, oh man, why didn't I say it earlier? Stuff like that. So.
Yeah. I was at a bar just down the street over here. And I was hanging out on the patio smoking a joint and like this group, they were probably like 50, 60, a group of a couple women. And I just heard like the oldest one of the bunch be like, what? Like make like what is that? And then she's like, oh yeah, it's legal now.
Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know if I don't think I told this story on air yet, so this might be a new one. We went to Southern Illinois Carbondale, and we were interviewing some of the faculty down there, and basically afterwards we went to this place called the Cellar, which is super cool. Shout out to the Cellar. It's a bar, um, and they let you smoke weed outside, like in the, just because people are smoking cigarettes too, so they let you smoke weed. And it was just so interesting because I didn't know that when I went there. And one of my friends, Osama, who will be on the podcast in the future, basically said like, "Hey man, if you want, you got any weed? I'm about to go grab my weed. We can roll up here." And I was like, "What, really?" And he was like, "Yeah." I had to ask him like 3 times, like, seriously, like we can smoke weed here? Because like, just like you, I feel pretty well emboldened to smoke weed anywhere at this point. But there are some times where I'm like, maybe here is it, like, maybe I'll go on a walk because there's like a bunch of type of thing.
I was pretty bad before legalization though too. Like my favorite bars in Chicago were always the ones you could get away with smoking at.
Oh,
Like they
really?
either had like a big outdoor patio or like, a single use bathroom that locked so you
Yes.
could roll a joint in there. Yeah, no, totally. I mean, there were a couple bars even that like, because I started drinking in bars before the smoking ban. So when they instituted the smoking ban, I remember there was one bar I was a regular at where they used to like close the doors at like 2, and then they
Right.
would let you hang out and smoke cigarettes after that for like an hour.
Uh-huh.
And you just had to be like let out whenever you wanted to leave. But you could, a couple people would just end up smoking weed in there because it's technically kind of like closed and private. And
Fuck yeah.
yeah, I mean, has always been kind of a good city for that kind of stuff. Not that they didn't arrest people in terrible amounts.
Sure, sure. But yeah, I mean, even like your story, we got the weed, and this guy had been there multiple times. Like he knew that you could do that. He had talked to the owners and knew that you could do that. The table next to us, like I start rolling up and the lady taps me on the shoulder and she's like, "Hey, it's only residential." And I like was already high and was like, "What are you saying?" She's like, it's only residential. And I didn't understand like what she was even trying to say to me. I thought she was trying
what a weird way to say that.
Yeah, I was like, "Are you trying to say that only people that live in Illinois can smoke weed? Or are you trying to say that?" And she was like, "You can only smoke weed at your house." And I was like, "But no, but he just told me I can smoke weed here." And she's like, "No, you can't." He's like, "No, yeah, you can." He's like, "Dude, don't worry about her." And she's like, "Well, I was just saying something because I don't know if anybody would have a problem." And I was just like, "Are you going to have a problem if I start smoking weed right now?" And she was like, No, I've got my vape pen in my purse. And it's like, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, all right. And it wasn't, but
She was
like,
just trying to help you out.
I don't know, because it wasn't but 3 minutes later, they got up and left. I mean, I just kept rolling up and they got up and left. So I don't know, maybe she was cool and maybe she was just like, "I'm going to be the cool stoner and talk to the other stoner and ask them not to do that right now." I got the impression maybe somebody in their group was like, "Hey, I don't like the smell of weed.
Maybe.
Shut that shit down." And I was just like, "Move your," and that I went inside and talked to the owner. So again, shout out to the Cellar. I was like, "Hey, I had the joint pre-rolled," and I was just like, "Hey, I just wanted to say that it is so cool that you get," and I bought a beer from her, tipped her, and I was like, "It is so cool that you're letting people smoke weed here." And she's like, "Yeah, I mean, and if people have a problem with it, just tell them to move tables. That's what we do with cigarettes. So tell them to move tables." And I just thought that was a really awesome response from the owner. So anyways, that's my little consumption in public story.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing I don't really get is like the idea of consumption lounges. I don't really find that appealing.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I get it maybe in like some context, like in cities, like for tourists and stuff. But like, I always think like, wouldn't that have existed when it was illegal if like people really wanted to do that? Like speakeasies existed during Prohibition because alcohol, like when you drink, you want to like hang out with people and be stupid. Like I always think like, because like friends of mine, like when they get high, the last thing they want to do is sit in a room with a bunch of people they don't know.
True. Yeah, true. Yeah, I've not really thought
I
about
just think
that
it's
before.
interesting. I think like they'll exist because it's like such a new thing, but I just wonder if eventually you'll have like coffee shops, because also like as its own thing, like how do you make money, you know?
That's
I don't
my
know. It's just
thing.
something I
Yeah.
think about. It's like I feel like because in Amsterdam, don't they like serve food and coffee? It's just kind of like a
Mhm.
restaurant that features weed.
Right. Yeah, I believe so. But yeah, I don't
I don't
know
know.
how
It's
you would
interesting. I
make
just
money
think
doing
it's
that.
interesting to think about the future of that kind of thing.
hmm It is cool. Like some of them in Southern Illinois, like those are the ones that are really striking to me because they don't, there's some in Chicago or at least one that I know of that's like attached to a dispensary. And so like you can buy weed there. And like you say, from a tourist perspective, that might make a lot of sense if you can't smoke in your hotel and you're just not trying to do it in public and you're worried
Well,
about that kind of thing.
like a place like Vegas, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but like in Southern Illinois, there's these consumption lounges that are literally just standalone consumption lounges.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's kind
Do
of
they do
interesting.
like shows?
Yes, that's
Yeah, so
as
that's
far as I can tell, that's kind of how they get people in the door. And that's a cool idea,
do they
comedy,
serve
music.
alcohol?
They don't. They don't. Yeah.
Interesting.
From what I've seen, they don't. And that's where I'm like, this bar, I say the Comedy Cellar, that's a place in New York. The Cellar in Carbondale, that's like a fucking brilliant idea. And I wonder like why more bars don't do that. Cause I wonder if it's because they're worried about getting in trouble for not having a consumption license, but it's like, it's private property. And if you're just saying people can do that, like, I don't,
Yeah, I
but again, I'm
wonder
not a
what.
lawyer.
Well, I think it's isn't it based on the like Illinois clean air thing that the same thing that the cigarette ban comes out of?
Mm,
Like,
perhaps.
isn't one of the problem is like secondhand smoke? Like, if you have like a
Yeah.
comedy club, I don't think you can do that because like the people that work there.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I feel bad. That's a point that, what's
Well,
Susan Schick brought up. Yeah.
well, because that's why like tobacco shops technically can be like smoke lounges, but you have to like make there's something like 80% of your income from the tobacco sales. Isn't that a
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
It's so
didn't
funny. The number of like when I go into like the smoke shops around here, they're all just fucking Delta 8 shops these days.
mm-hmm.
It's just so funny to me. Like anytime I'm in there, like looking for papers and things, there's just like all these like early 20 somethings picking up gummies.
It must work, man. I hear that they can be pretty good,
I've never tried it. I've thought about going to get that guy's ice cream, that Jane and
Yeah.
Mary's, because he started putting that in a bunch of smoke shops all over the place. That'll probably be the first Delta 8 I end up trying. But actually, the one place I was gonna go pick it up by a friend's house, a friend of mine lives up in Pilsen,
Mm-hmm.
was that was the place that had like a raid.
Ah,
Remember that?
yeah. That was way
Like
back
funky. No, it was like 6 months ago.
then. Oh, I'm thinking of a different one then.
It was like Funky Buddha Smoke or Funky Smoke Lounge, some Buddha Smoke
Mhm.
Lounge, something like that.
Yeah.
But they were having like a vendor event and they got like raided and a bunch of people arrested. I think it was closed.
Damn.
So that interrupted my trying of Jane and Mary's.
Yeah, I will say Jane and Mary's is fucking. It's good. It's just
Well,
really
I
good
just love
ice
that
cream.
that guy. I
Yeah.
just love that guy because he obviously didn't get an infusion license. I'm guessing. I think he applied for one, right?
I don't really know. I need to reach out to him and see what's going
But
on.
either
with all
way,
that.
he's
I don't
like
know.
making it. He's making it work for himself outside
Yep.
of the system.
Yeah.
I just kind of love that.
Yeah, and I like how he's doing it too, where he'll bring these people a freezer and like, I will help you.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll restock it all. Like he just seemed really cool.
Well, I think that's how like like those like fresh pasta things at the grocery store. Like I'm sure the grocery store is not paying for that little refrigerator.
Sure.
It's probably the vendor, the supplier, whoever's selling that pasta.
Mm-hmm. Hell yeah! Shout out to that pasta. It's dank.
Yeah, it's the only pasta to get.
Hell yeah, man. Hell yeah. Well, this has been fun. I'm not by no means wrapping the show, but I just wanted to reflect for a moment on how many topics we've we've touched on.
I have no idea what we've talked about.
Oh, we've probably not.
This has been
about,
a long, winding conversation.
Yeah, we've gone like this for sure, but hopefully, hopefully it's entertaining for the folks. I mean, the point I wanted to do today was just kind of kick back and just go all over the place. Cause frankly, I've been like laser focused on a few different things. So it's nice to just smoke weed and chat with a fellow advocate,
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah. This is fun. That's why I started using Reddit and Instagram and engaging with people about cannabis on there, is because like everyone I know in life uses cannabis to some extent. Nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk about it like I do. So it's just fun to go on there and like share articles and just see what people are thinking about it. And, sometimes if they say something that's completely wrong, maybe correct them and give them a little insight on, why that's not right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very well said. Yeah. It's a good thing that you're doing. And I appreciate, the fact that you take the time to do those things. And I wish I was closer to Chicago so that I, could make it to some of those protests. Cause what I really liked about what you had to say, and I just wanted to give you the space if there was anything else cool that happened with regard to that. I thought that sounded so cool to be able to stand out in front of a dispensary with like a sign that will catch a stoner's attention, and they will talk to you. Stoners, they'll come up and talk to you. And I don't know, that just sounds so cool. So yeah,
it's just funny because like, I kept having the people who stand on the side of the highway with the graphic images of aborted fetuses.
Yeah.
That's a little bit how I felt.
Sure.
But it's fun because I think a lot of people who shop at dispensaries in Illinois know that, for a lack of a better way to put it, there's not a lot of culture in the dispensaries. So I feel like if you see a group that's outside of a dispensary talking about how that dispensary lobbied against home grow or lobbied for limited licensing, they're like, well, what the fuck are these people doing?
Yeah.
And a lot of people like to engage, and they're certainly if they're going into a dispensary, they have some kind of an interest in cannabis. And anyone going into to a dispensary in Illinois knows they're being royally fucked in any number of ways. So yeah, it was fun.
Did you have any
again at some point?
I'm sure you had a lot of people that approached you that were like really intrigued and maybe even never heard of it before, like heard of like what was going on.
Oh yeah. People know things are weird. Like they know Illinois isn't like other states, but someone who follows the news like you do, like you could kind of explain to someone in a minute or two, like why the market is structured the way it is and why they don't have more choices and why shops haven't opened up and why the prices are still so high. And, that people are still arrested and that it's not really legal because you can't grow your own.
Right.
All that kind of stuff.
I'm really curious. Did you have anybody that you talked to and went through that 2-minute summary and that they were just like, okay. And then they just went into the store?
Oh, because that's the thing is people don't have options,
Sure.
I turned a number of people away from shopping,
Oh yeah. And sorry, I don't mean to frame the question that way. I just meant no. But yeah, that is a good point.
I turned a number of people away from shopping, but what I'm saying is people don't have other options. Like the only things I could tell somebody if someone's like, oh, well, where should I go to get my cannabis? It's like, well,
yeah,
black market.
And then they're like, well, dude, I would do that if I had the option, right?
You can give people tips on how to find a black market dealer, but it's like, you got to be the kind of person that would be comfortable doing that thing.
Right.
And I think, most people aren't. Most people just want to go to a store and go home.
Yeah. And again, I did not mean to frame the question like that way and that, like, I wasn't trying to ask like, how many people did you turn away? But like, I meant to ask, like, were there people that truly seemed to not care? Like, I get the people that were like,
yes. Cause we were out in the suburbs one day. The older crowd in the suburbs did not give a shit.
But did they ask? So did they like ask you? But then while you're saying it, they're just like, fuck it, and then just went in, or like what?
Just less approaching, less engagement.
I see.
Just like, okay.
Yeah.
I don't know what you guys are doing out here.
Yeah, because I want to say that I totally get the perspective that like stands there and like listens to you, and they're like, wow, this all makes sense. That's really fucked up. With all that said, I still am going to go there and get some weed because, like, frankly, I want to get high today. Like, I totally get that perspective. Like, if you don't have an option,
Yeah. That's why, like, telling someone, well, like, I mean, as much as I would love to tell people not to support any of the people who lobbied for the state that things are in Illinois, like, people need weed. Like,
right.
I feel like I'm insulting someone by being like, don't go there, but you have no other option.
Exactly.
It's like, it's a little like holier than thou,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In a certain way, it's like ableist.
I do think when, like, I mean, it's hard in Illinois because the ownership stuff is confidential. Yeah. But I do think when actual craft operators open, like I met that guy Ambrose from 1937 out at the True Social Equity stuff. He seems like a great guy, mm-hmm. And when his stuff is able to be, like you can give that as an option to people. But the terrible thing about Illinois is it's like so top to bottom owned by the original operators that like even when you go to buy that new craft product, if you're medical, you're going to be buying it at one of their dispensaries.
Yep.
And if you're buying it, say at one of the new independent shops, that shop is probably going to be carrying a lot of those companies' brands, selling those, so it's like you can never really shop at anywhere that's going to be like free of those original operators. That's going to be something new and independent. They like just like own it top to bottom.
Right.
It's so crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the fact that even some of the new applicants are kind of like tied to the existing ones. So that even furthers.
Well, what are you going to do? You know?
Right. Yeah.
It's like, yeah. It's as much as you want to like, it's just so fucked.
Mm-hmm. I mean, straight up, dude. Like to a certain extent, you can't like fault people for doing that. I think it is important to still point it out that it's going on, but to a certain extent it's like,
oh yeah. Well, and there's, like, and it's disheartening. Like, I don't know, you just see like those companies like Curaleaf and GTI and them, they sponsor, I mean, they just have money to go around. So they sponsor everything. So their name is just on everything. And it's just annoying.
Yeah.
Like it just makes you want to like not deal with any of it and just kind of like, like whenever there's some home grow bill, just start calling legislators and encourage other people to call about the new home grow bill. And I don't know, just focus on that.
Yeah.
Just the loosening of the laws around the criminal stuff.
Yeah. We've got to do that because I think that will go a long way towards, to quote David Bienenstock, decommodifying cannabis. Like, just
I loved that guy's interview. That was great.
Yeah, he was brilliant. He was brilliant.
That was great.
Like I never rewatch my own podcast. I had to rewatch that one
I watched it twice too.
Yeah, I just had to hear what he had to say, and shout out to him. He's got a great podcast
like that. Yeah, I do mean to check that out. I was wondering if he had done an episode about Rainbow Farms. You know what that is?
Mm-mm.
I was looking up YouTube videos of it like the other week. It's actually not far from us in Illinois. It's like Vandalia, Michigan. It's near Cassopolis.
Okay.
But it was like a weed Ruby Ridge. It was these two gay guys and they had this place, Rainbow Farms, and they like grew weed on the property. And they would host events. They had actually Tommy Chong was there at some point. There's a video of him on YouTube there that you can find. Nice. So you have a 1 degree of separation to that place. but yeah, it was like they were like, you know, living the libertarian dream of being a gay couple protecting their weed with guns, and
Yeah.
the local police just, you know, eventually were not cool with it and ended up like killing both of them. I mean, they like arrested him, took the one's kid away, and then like they burned the property down, and then they had like an armed standoff, and they ended up both being killed. But it happened like a week before 9/11. It's just a crazy story.
Yeah.
Like, and I feel like a lot of people don't know about it. So I kind of wanted to make a point to bring it up.
Yeah. This is insane. This is insane. And I didn't, you said it happened before 9/11. So it was in like 2000, 2001. I mean,
It was, I just because I watched something about it, it was like September 3rd, 2001. Yeah.
wow.
I mean, and I was like, you know, at that time I would have been like 16. And, you know, I first smoked weed when I was 14 and was like getting into the looking up cannabis and getting into cannabis culture back, you know, starting to listen to reggae back then. So I feel like I would have like, you know, I paid attention to the news then. I don't remember ever hearing about it
yeah.
until like, you know, the show Jazz Cabbage Cafe.
I feel like it sounds familiar.
It's like guys from Michigan Normal, but they
Okay.
had like an episode about it. And that was the first time I ever heard about it.
Huh.
Was like the 20th anniversary of it, like a year ago.
So Rainbow Farms. I'm going to have to look into that.
And actually these days you can rent an Airbnb there. And I think it's like a cannabis friendly Airbnb campground.
And is it like built-in memorandum at all? Do they have any?
I think it's owned by the family. I mean, I'm sure there's some kind of thing there for it, like maybe a memorial or something. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, I think it's like, it operates in tribute. I think they host events again, like weed events.
Mm-hmm. That's very
it's
cool.
just it's interesting.
Yeah. I've never heard of that.
Some Midwest cannabis history.
Straight up.
Totally. Well, I always wonder too, like, I feel like I don't really hear about those kind of stories, you know, like in Michigan too, has that whole back in the 70s with John Sinclair and like Ann Arbor decriminalizing weed.
Right.
Like, does Illinois have any of those stories? Like, I can't really think of like cannabis history in Illinois.
I mean, I've thought about doing it if like a episode on the history of cannabis in Illinois. This is totally off the top of my head when I was doing some research to try to do something like that. And I recall that in like 1980 something, Illinois technically legalized medical cannabis, but they made it so that the police had to certify the physicians that could certify you for medical cannabis. And so it never happened.
I wonder if that was like an Illinois State Police change, like our legalization bill, you know, not having home grow.
Yeah. From what I understand, it was definitely an effort on behalf of the Illinois State Police to sabotage that program. You know, it's kind of like they were like, yeah, you can do that if you have this provision in there that allows us to not let you do that.
Yeah, of course.
You know?
Yeah, that's interesting. When did you say that? What year was that?
I think it was like 1984 or something like that. Let me see here if I can just find it off of a quick Google. Illinois cannabis history. But yeah, it's 1978, which technically allowed for medical cannabis. However, in order for it to become an actuality, action was required from two state departments, Human Services and the state police. Neither department took action.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think I'd ever heard that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I thought it was, like I said, I thought about doing a kind of a big history of the Illinois cannabis market, you know, like a whole episode on it. But the thing is like, I'm kind of like pushing that off because I really feel like we're still very much in the history part. So
what do you mean?
You know, like not much has really changed. And
yeah.
You know, so I
yeah, well, that's
like,
what I was saying when we first started is like why I find this so fascinating is like, you know, just like in the rest of the world, pandemics and wars, like we're living in such like interesting times, you know, sometimes scary, but like it's just, you know, like when I was a kid, I never thought you'd be able to go into a dispensary and buy weed. Like I remember starting to smoke weed and like you find out about like Amsterdam and it was like, what? Like you can go into a coffee shop and just like buy weed. Like they have different kinds. Wow.
Right.
Yeah. It's crazy how things change.
Yeah, it really is.
But we're definitely in like, I don't know if, because in the larger context of like ending the whole drug war, you know, like I don't even know if it's like the first inning really.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really feel like most of these cannabis companies we see, and I don't wish ill will on anybody, but I just don't think they're going to last the test of time.
Oh, they're not going to maybe last through the end of the year.
Yeah.
If a recession hits and it's bad enough, like I think a couple of them could be in trouble.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know enough about anything to say that, but I've definitely heard that.
I mean, I read somewhere that like High Times was potentially going to go bankrupt.
Yeah. Yeah. They've kind of been on a bad path anyway. I think David Beanstalk actually mentioned that, you know, they like lost their original owner and it's just kind of been like.
I always refer to them as just a stock scam because there was that story that they were like advertising an IPO forever and selling shares to like, and people like, hey, invest in our IPO, we'll sell you at this price. And it was like something like they were selling it at a higher price than they knew they were going to get. And like the people that are like in charge of doing public offerings were like, you guys aren't allowed to do this. Like you got to stop. You're not going to have an IPO. So yeah, they were like kind of defrauding people who, you know, probably read High Times growing up and were like, oh yeah, I'll invest in High Times.
Right. Make money. They've always been at the forefront. Yeah. I've never heard of that. I honestly don't know much about stocks and IPOs and all that stuff anyways. So, or like, I don't even know, you know what, I get the general concept. Yeah, I get the general concept that they were fucking people, but like when it comes, if you were to ask me to explain it back to you, I would fail that test.
Yeah. They were representing themselves falsely to get money, you know, on the promise that people would get money later. Gotcha. I guess that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just be interesting. Yeah. I don't mean to, it seems like, you know, a lot of times the conversation always feels negative, like with cannabis in Illinois, and that there's certainly reason to be upset. But like you say, I want to just take a moment to like really just live in the moment. And the fact that I'm like, yeah, we're doing this. We've got a camera on ourselves, you know.
Well, it's funny because you can be like, oh, I can be super negative about cannabis in Illinois, you know, but it's like, you can also discuss it in a way that's like, really, you know, it's like you can discuss it and not seem like you're like angry, super angry and annoying, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
like you can bitch about it and discuss it in like a larger way of like, well, this is probably why it's like that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
You just got to keep your expectations low in Illinois.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, but
yeah.
Well, shit. My laptop is about to die and I do not have power nearby. I think, you know,
well, we can end this.
I was going to say just about now is a good time to wrap. It's about time to eat lunch. I'm going to take the last hit of the bowl. I want to thank you again, Philip, for just coming on and shooting the shit with me. It's been a good time.
It was fun to finally talk.
Hell yeah. The next thing we need to do is smoke in person. So we'll make that happen.
Yeah. If you're ever up in Chicago, we would love to have you.
Hell yeah. Well, Chillinois, I hope you found some relief in this episode. So we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Chillinois podcast. See you, everybody.